It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. For those of you who are just joining in, welcome to the holidays on Her Success Story. It is one of the very exciting and important times to me, very personal. For me, as Ivy, this season, every holiday season is an opportunity to give and receive. So we love receiving things. That's always fun. I also think it's really fun giving. It's an important piece of myself, something near and dear to my heart. And so the very first year in 2018, when we started the show, I decided that from Thanksgiving through past the New Year's holidays, we were going to dedicate this piece every year to learn more about the nonprofits out there. So as we receive, we are learning how to give, and that's sometimes financially, sometimes just getting involved, sometimes giving a piece of knowledge that we could then run with and say, hey, I've had this idea forever. Now I have some tools to get started. So today I want to welcome an amazing woman. Allison Fine is a clinical social worker supporting clients with both emotional and physical challenges based out of Seattle, Washington. I've been speaking to a lot of people in Seattle lately. She founded the Center for Chronic Illness in 2016 to better meet the emotional needs for those impacted by ongoing health challenges. She has also worked as a therapist in private practice, specializing in this population for the past 15 years. Welcome, Allison, and thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you so much, Ivy. I'm so thrilled to be here and really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of your podcast.
So I have to say, I personally know a whole bunch of people who deal with chronic illness. And I think many of us do. But other than going to, quote unquote, the doctor for their whatever visit, we don't know too much else what to do for them. So when we were connected, and again, we were connected through the networks and people we know mutually in common, I was so grateful to learn about the Center for Chronic Illness. So give me a little information. Let's talk about what this is, and I want to hear about how it got started in 2016. So what is the Center for Chronic Illness?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our goal is really to promote well-being and decrease isolation for folks impacted by ongoing health challenges. And what you speak to, Ivy, about we don't know how to help folks with chronic illness. I think that's a common sentiment. And the folks that are out there living with chronic illness, I think are pretty isolated, for a lot of different reasons, either not feeling well or sometimes it's about not having people in their lives who understand what they're going through. And so then they don't have the energy to continue trying to put themselves out there. And so what we wanted to do was really create a space for people to connect over kind of some shared health experiences, not necessarily symptoms, but just the fact oh, I go to the doctor frequently. Oh, you go to the doctor frequently too. Or, oh, yes, I've had these 10 tests done on me. Or, yes, I've had that too. And we really just wanted to create safe, compassionate spaces for people to be able to talk and connect with one another. So that was really the origin of CCI. My work as a clinical social worker was working one-on-one with folks with chronic illness. And while I found that I was able to treat their anxiety or their depression as it related to chronic illness, I still felt like I was sending them home to their same isolated environment after our appointments. And so I really wanted to give some sense of community to this population and be able to allow them to connect further.
It's interesting because in thinking about the word isolation, when somebody has a chronic illness, and can we give some examples of what chronic illnesses, some of the chronic illnesses out there, because it's putting a lot under a very big umbrella. And I always say, let's drill down to some specifics before we go further.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I typically describe it is anyone living with an autoimmune disease, a rare disease, a physical disability, an invisible illness, a chronic pain condition. So kind of any of those things. And, when you think about it from a medical perspective, anywhere in the body, something can go wrong. And oftentimes that's what's happening in chronic illness is that there's some part of the body that is not functioning as it's supposed to. It's not anybody's fault or anything they've done wrong. It's about genetics, sometimes it's about just family history or DNA. There's so many reasons why things don't go right in the body. But I think that's kind of how I describe it for people because we are operating under such a large umbrella. But things like rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel disease, things that are more rare that people have never even heard of, sickle cell anemia. There's just so many chronic illnesses out there, and they all have this opportunity, I guess, and not a great way to impact people's bodies and their level of functioning.
So what drove you to start this organization? What was the catalyst?
That's a good question. I think my counseling work with folks, impacted by various health conditions. I started off doing work in the multiple sclerosis community. And thankfully, in the MS world, there are a lot of resources. And I was one of those resources for folks here in Seattle. And other folks with other diagnoses started finding me as like the MS counselor, and they're like, well, do you work with people with chronic fatigue syndrome or with fibromyalgia? And then I kind of became the chronic illness counselor in this area and, just realized how big of a map there was for how many individuals are being impacted by chronic health challenges and not getting any kind of connection or support they need. They might be getting the medical piece of it, but there's so much more.
As a being a counselor and a clinical social worker, anytime you start a business, you say, oh, drill down to the niche. And that's quite the niche. And I'm sure you could be pretty busy in Seattle and just staying with that niche. So now let's go back to, and what drove you to start a national organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. I mean, I think it was a number of things. I think it was seeing my own family, have challenges with various chronic illnesses. I think it was my own experience living with an autoimmune disease and feeling like the emotional support that I needed at that time wasn't there. Again, watching patients go through that and not having a place to send them as a resource for them to connect with others. So I think it was just a number of things. And then I think I also just have a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, and so I liked the idea of like, okay, well, what am I going to start next? And, wanted to kind of figure out what that looked like and took some, thoughtful time to do that. But yeah, really liked the idea of creating. At first, I thought it was going to be a physical space, and then it became clear that that wasn't actually going to serve anybody but me, to be able to sit in a physical space that I felt good about, and instead, realize like folks with chronic illness actually really need ways to connect that don't involve more hardship on them, don't involve having to find transportation to get somewhere at a certain time and, show up for a support group or something like that. So, yeah, it became really clear that this virtual component of what we do actually really served the community quite well. So that I think is maybe the better story of how it started. But I think, yeah, it was just a lot of little things that led to this moment of like, oh, I'm going to start a center for chronic illness.
And kudos to you. You have over 20 support groups going on.
Thank you.
You
Thank you.
do two fundraisers a year. Talk about like the progression of the organization where this is today, because it started with an idea, but it flourished and grew. And I was like, how did you do that?
Yeah, when I first had the idea at the end of 2014, I was kind of like, is this just an idea or is this something that is actually needed in the community and that I should put my time and heart and energy into? And so, I ended up doing a focus group with some social work friends out here in Seattle. And that was hugely helpful because we sat and talked about what are all the needs for folks living with chronic health challenges, and what would it look like to create an organization. And actually after that meeting, I was like,
I
oh my,
wanted, I'm going to jump in here for a
right?
second because I think that was a brilliant action that you put a bunch of your colleagues in a room and you did a focus group to really understand the pain point, the problems, and banded and then created solutions from a diverse group of hard facts.
Thanks, thanks. Yeah, I think I realized early on that if I was going to create something larger than just a counseling practice, that I needed more people's input and needed more involvement from the community. And so it was lovely. I'm lucky to have a lot of wonderful colleagues here and to be able to kind of throw ideas out there and to have them be willing to sit in a room with me, at which we actually recorded that conversation initially. And but yeah, what came out of that was a little bit of overwhelm of like, oh my goodness, how do we meet the needs of this community? Because there are so many. And I think what it came back to for me was, where does my heart lie, and what am I going to feel comfortable putting time and energy into to create this thing. And so for me, that was the emotional support component as a social worker, as a therapist. That is what I felt like was really missing. And obviously there are a lot of other needs in this community that aren't being met still, but I think I had to begin where my heart was. So, but yeah, from those initial conversations to starting the organization in 2016, I worked with some wonderful law students from the University of Washington who, as part of their coursework, helped us set up all of the legal aspects of a nonprofit organization. And then in 2017, we started our first two support groups. And so it's interesting to see how we've grown over time. And when the pandemic hit, the COVID-19 pandemic, the need for what we did grew exponentially, because folks with chronic illness were already oftentimes at home and isolated, but now they were extra vulnerable when they did try to go out and leave their homes. And so there was this huge opportunity and kind of hole in the community of like, how do we serve these folks? And so we had programs at the time in Seattle as well as online. And so thankfully we were already set up virtually to be doing that kind of programming. And we just moved everything online. We opened things up nationally a little more at that point, and really just tried to stay afloat. I didn't know how we would do as a small nonprofit, going through a pandemic, but and I had heard through the grapevine, funding is going to be a problem and it's going to be a challenge to, just keep your business going. And so I kind of mentally prepared myself for that while we were still fueling forward, and the need
And
was.
so, how did you navigate that? Because I want to ask, because huge kudos to you, Allison. There's so often when we hear, oh, this is going to be a problem, and oh, this is going to happen, and we've been hearing about the economic situation in this country for, and I was like, I let those things move through me.
Yeah.
Because we could find problems in everything and everywhere, and the more we focus on it, the more problem that comes back to us.
Yeah.
I know I have been told by people near and dear to me, like, well, you're just a cockeyed optimist, Ivy, we're not all, so, and okay, fine. But you were new at this at the time, and everybody's saying, oh, this is going to be, how did you deal with that? How did you navigate it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think for me, I'm definitely not an optimist. I tend to be more of a realist. And so at the start of the pandemic, I said to myself, we might not make it, and just immediately prepared myself for that, which is something I do in a lot of areas of my life, is kind of mentally prepare for things. But I think at the same time, being someone who's immunocompromised myself, I intimately understood what was happening to our community. And I felt like it was my job to protect our community and to create opportunities for us to still connect with one another, even though the rest of the world was kind of doing whatever they were doing, whether it was lockdown at home, going out and ignoring the pandemic. There's a whole range, but I knew, so many people that weren't able to just kind of live normal life at that time. And so, really I use that, I think, as a motivator to try to figure out, what do we do with our fundraising events? We were slotted to do our first in-person dinner fundraiser that May of 2020. And immediately I was like, nope, we can't do that. Take that off the calendar. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, what does fundraising look like during a pandemic? And how do we pivot to be able, the big word at the time, pivot. How do we
Big
pivot?
word at the time.
So
I have to say, I'm kind of done with that word right now.
yeah. Me too. Yeah, there's been so much pivoting. Yeah. So yeah, we ended up doing virtual fundraisers over Zoom during the pandemic. We put together, virtual wine tastings and sent people wine and chocolate boxes. And, I think at a time when so many people weren't going out, it was actually really well received. And so we were really successful at doing some of those virtual events. And then as we went through the pandemic and we got closer to this point where it was safer for our population to go out and do more, we had to try to figure out, okay, well, our group doesn't want to be in person in a restaurant or in a big, setting. How do we pivot again, to be able to continue to serve the community, continue to raise money to offer the programs that we're doing. And so now we're doing outdoor events, where we welcome masks and, allow people to be a part of it and connect with one another, but still in a fairly safe environment for those who are vulnerable. So that's been a lot of fun, trying to kind of sort all of that out. It's been an adventure for sure.
Where do you see, so you have your events, you do things at 2 fundraisers a year, with 20 support groups going, which is a lot. And I assume, I assume, and I know I shouldn't make an assumption. I own that one. Are these support groups national?
Yeah, so all of them except for two of them. So we've kind of honored the fact that a lot of the participants who were joining our groups here in Seattle already knew each other, already had a good core group going. And so we've kept two of them Washington State specific. But, over time have realized that we have folks from, I think, 48 states at this point joining our programs. And so it just made so much sense to be able to offer them nationally. And we actually have a small handful of people who join us from other countries as well. I'm not exactly sure how they're finding us, but
That's fabulous. That is amazing.
thanks. Yeah. It's really neat, the fact that people from all over can join a group over a shared concern and connect with each other.
Where do you see the vision for this going? What is your vision going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we first started CCI, I had put together a 5-year plan, and then mid-pandemic realized, like, what do we do now? Like, we did everything that we said we were going to do, and now what's going to happen? So then I put together another 5-year plan. And so we kind of, are looking at capacity building in a big way right now and trying to figure out how do we just build more, like, we're a small, scrappy nonprofit that has the potential to serve such a large population of people. And so we're just trying to figure out how do we build more structure into our foundation to be able to allow for that growth. And then I just honestly imagine more support groups, more bringing more contracted facilitators on, bringing more, staffing onto the organization. Right now, I'm a solo staff person and I wear all the hats. So it's wonderful because I'm challenged in so many different ways. And at the same time, it's not sustainable for the longer term as we grow. And so, looking at how do we just grow the organization kind of in every capacity, do more, just workshops and programming like that, in addition to our support groups. So
Allison, how can our listeners continue to learn more, get involved, or if needed, reach out as a resource for themselves? Because that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. We offer programs for patients living with chronic illness, but also for loved ones. So, we would love for folks to visit our website. It's thecenterforchronicillness.org, and you can check out our programs page and get involved there. And if you're interested in, our workshops or becoming a supporter or anything else, we have a fairly extensive website where you can find all of that information. We also love social media followers and things like that. So you're welcome to check us out there too. But yeah, we're growing and we would love, more people just to know about the work that we're doing and to be able to get the word out to the people who actually need our services as well.
And, I thank you. I know your time is busy. You still have a full, actually, private practice,
So
as well as the center that you're running.
thankfully, just 2 days a week in practice and yeah, 3 days with CCI. So it's a good mix of everything. But yeah, as CCI grows, I'll probably be doing more and more CCI. So
Thank you for all the people I know who are living with this, and their families, for offering the place for them to have a safe space to talk about the challenging journey this is.
absolutely. Yeah, we're so happy to do this. And I know so many that are a part of our community feel so strongly attached to this vision. And so, I hope that this podcast will at least allow folks who don't know about us to check us out and see if it's the right kind of support for them as well.
Absolutely. And I will say the website so people can check into it is.
Yes, so www.thecenterforchronicillness.org. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it works.
And you did a huge shout out. Check out the Center for Chronic Illness on all the social media handles.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to see you there. We share different articles related to chronic illness. We share flyers about our support group programs and other things. So,
I will say, listeners, thank you for joining me here today on Her Success Story. Take a moment and think about the one thing listening today. What was the one impact, the one takeaway that resonated for you? Jot it down somewhere, whether that be in notes in your phone, whether that be on a piece of paper. And if it's somebody you know with chronic illness, share something forward. Define one action you can take. I'll always say, if we define one action, we will all continue to save the world, one baby step at a time. Allison, thank you again.
thank you so much, Ivy. We really appreciate it.
And wishing everybody a wonderful holiday. Show up for yourself, your family, and give yourself a gift as well. See you next time.
Don't need your approval anymore, 'cause I've got mine.